morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest. Good morning, Slava.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Have you survived the zombie apocalypse?
I have. Thankfully, our government has been fully transparent with what happened. I am barricaded in my house with food supplies, cache of weapons.
Unlike our protagonist, you have a cache of weapons. That's good.
Yeah. I also don't have any qualms about murdering mindless dead creatures, essentially, that are coming over my defense of my house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not contemplating the morality of killing zombies.
That makes one of you. Anyway, before we dive in, what are we reading today?
We are reading Apocalypse Z, The Beginning of the End, by Manel Loureiro. We have not read this before. This was suggested to us by a listener on the same thread that The Girl with All the Gifts was suggested by Insta user NotSure2099. And our book, as told to us by Wikipedia, is a gripping survival horror story told through a journal format, a blog entry format, really. A Spanish lawyer chronicles the slow fall of society as an unknown virus turns the dead into relentless monsters.
Perfect. This is a 2-episode structure where we'll explore the origins of Apocalypse Z, break down some of the themes of survival and isolation, talk about our rants regarding the book, and hopefully dive into some thoughts about zombie books. The first episode here, we'll talk about the author, the overview, and some themes. And the second book, we'll do a deep dive into the plot as it's chunked up into chapters. So, Slava, over to you to tell us more about the author.
Manel Loureiro. Born on December 30th, 1975 in Spain, he has established himself as one of the most recognized Spanish authors in the genre. Apparently, referred to as the Spanish Stephen King, he has built a reputation for crafting suspenseful, immersive narratives that keep readers on the edge of their seats. Loureiro's journey into literary fame is anything but conventional, or so we're told. We've kind of seen this before in the books we've covered. Person has a career, decides to write, turns into a writer, career kicks off. He's a former lawyer, just like the protagonist. His passion for storytelling led him down a different path than law. Over the years, he has worked as a television presenter, screenwriter, and journalist, contributing to major Spanish publications such as ABC, El Mundo, and El Confidencial. He's also a regular contributor to Condera SER Radio and the Spanish edition of JQ magazine. Despite this diverse career in media, it was his foray into fiction writing that brought him acclaim, and his ability to blend horror, suspense, and psychological depth has resonated with readers, earning him pretty devoted following.
Do you love books? Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so that you never miss an episode. So Slava, how did he get this idea? Where did this start from in Loureiro's? I know you gave us kind of a history here. You gave us the fact that he was on a bunch of different news and I would call it pop culture shows. What surprised me, not that I know this person prior to reading his book, is the Spanish edition of GQ magazine. I guess I never put too much thought into GQ that they have international versions of it. But when you said that, I'm just thinking about like a bunch of Fabio style looking guys, open shirts, breezing in the wind on the Spanish Sea.
Yeah, as opposed to Brad Pitt, short-haired Fabios.
Correct.
On our side of the ocean.
Just a little more tan, basically.
Exactly. So, the blog that started it all. Loureiro's first novel, the one we're covering, Apocalypse Z, The Beginning of the End, or Apocalypsis Z, or however Spanish people say Z, El Principio del Fin, originally began as a blog. His storytelling on this blog quickly attracted a loyal readership, leading to the book's official publication. Then the novel became a bestseller in multiple countries, including Spain, Brazil, and Italy. And due to its popularity, Amazon Crossing released an English translation in 2012, and a Galatian edition followed in 2013. And then there's been film adaptation as well. And he began to expand the Apocalypse Z world following the success of this debut. And we also have Apocalypse Z, The Dark Days, Los Dias Oscuros in 2010, Apocalypse Z, The Wrath of the Just, La Ira de los Justos in 2011. Both sequels were translated into English, Italian, and Portuguese. And Dark Days was also released in Galatia in 2014. And this trilogy, as already mentioned, follows the terrifying journey of survival in a post-apocalyptic world overrun by the undead, and it blends fast-paced action, psychological death, we'll discuss that, and suspense.
Don't hold back your thoughts in the tone of your voice.
Was that that obvious?
We'll discuss that. So what can you tell me, and the readers, can you tell me and the listeners, what is the Galatian edition? What, I've literally never heard of that before.
I just looked up Galatian, and it's an autonomous community of Spain.
Oh, great.
Galatia, an autonomous community of Spain.
What does that even mean? Are they like exempt from the Spanish high bourgeoisie government?
I don't know. You know, this is one of the things I didn't research, and as much research as I do, I just never thought that this would be a question you'd ask me.
Yeah, didn't ask a question. If you don't know by episode, I was this like 113 or something like that. If you don't know now that I ask questions about the obscure side comment details, then you haven't been paying attention.
Well, here's what Wikipedia says. For us and for the listeners, modern Galatia is classified as part of the Western Iberian languages group, a family of Roman languages. Galatian, also known as Gallego, I would imagine Gallego, is a Western Iberia Romance language. Around 2.4 million people have at least some degree of competence in the language, and it's part of southwestern Spain.
Huh. Okay. So it's basically part of the summary is just stating that it's also translated into this other language. How close? This is my last question, and then I'll ask you a real question that's related to the show side quest. How close is Galatian language to Spanish?
It's pretty close as Portuguese is. It
Okay.
evolved from Latin, Vulgar Latin. Modern scholars call it Galatian Portuguese.
Interesting.
Apparently, the earliest document written in Galatian dates back to 1230 AD.
This is a pretty modern language, is what you're telling me.
Modern, yeah. As far as languages go, it's not that old.
That joke didn't hit. Anyway, Slava, I got a side quest for you.
Over my head. Went right over my head.
Yeah. Clearly my tone was not as clear as your psychological depth. We'll discuss that. If you had to survive a zombie apocalypse, but could take 3 items from your current home, right? Let's just call it your current home, not just like 3 random items that you could just pick and wish existed. What would they be? What would your 3 items be for your survival?
Well, my first item would be my hunting rifle. Then I'd probably take my dog. And is my wife alive? I'll take my wife.
I don't think that she counts as an item, but I'll leave that for you two to discuss.
Well, then I would take my hunting sack and snacks, like to sit in the woods and eat jerky and not die of starvation in the woods of my state. My
Not
hunting
right away.
rifle and some clothes, and change of clothes. Because I'm imagining I have to leave in 30 minutes. What do I take?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
a gun, food, and some clothes.
Yeah, I think it's just a given that, like, your dogs will go with you, your wife will go with you. That scenario just seems normal to me. Like, I would take... That's tough. I don't own any guns. I do own some knives, so definitely my bag of knives. I'm definitely going to bring that. I'm similarly going to grab some clothes. I don't have a lot of survival gear here, man. So I'm not going to make it very far. I don't have a bag of snacks.
As long as your knives are big, fuck off, shiny ones, if you know, you know. That's a call out to a 90s movie. I think you'd be okay.
They're not. I mean, I don't have it on me. I was going to pull it out for you and whip it into the camera.
It's a nice letter opener.
Yeah, well, that's what Nightblood was supposed to be, but he's not sharp, so disappointing.
Ooh, if you really had Nightblood,
Oh, I'd be
you'd be
fine.
helpful.
I'd be fine.
You'd be fine.
Oh, speaking of, actually, I do own a katana and some other martial arts weapons, so I'm probably just gonna grab my martial arts weapons bag as my third item. So 2 sets of weaponry and clothes. Although I'm not sure I would leave because I don't know where I'd go.
And you live in a basement, so you'll be fine.
I'm fine, like, protection-wise. I'm not fine food-wise, you know?
Hmm.
Like, I go to the store for food. I don't know how to forage necessarily unless it's very clear, like black raspberries or mulberries or something like that. Other plants or, general herbs. I'm not killing a squirrel to eat it because I don't know how to do that. I clearly don't have a gun of any kind or even a pellet gun. So if the question was I could go to the store real quick, I'd buy a gun.
So you're saying you can't dress a deer?
No, I would put a nose that's red on its nose to make it a reindeer.
Ah,
No, I have no
well,
idea
well
how to.
done. Well done.
My jokes today are not great. They
That one was actually good. That's a good nonsensical joke. That's a
You-
good dry joke.
appreciate
First one
you
I still don't get the first one, but the second one hit.
humoring me, I suppose. Anyway, give us a quick summary of the plot and the hook and the character goals.
A mysterious incident in Russia, buried in the news, serves as the only warning that civilization will soon be destroyed by a virus that turns humans into monsters. We meet up with our protagonist 1 year after the death of his wife. Our protagonist is a lawyer, watches as the deadly virus spreads across Europe. The government attempts to suppress information about the outbreak, which transforms infected people into aggressive zombies. As humanity begins to fall, the lawyer, still grieving the loss of his young wife, is writing journal entries or blog entries as a form of therapy, but he never expected that his anonymous blog would ultimately record humanity's last days. The end of the world has begun. Governments scramble to contain the zombie virus, panic ensues, and so-called safe havens are established while chaos engulfs the globe. Soon, it becomes every man, woman, and child for themselves. Armed only with makeshift weapons and the will to survive, our protagonist emerges as a lone survivor, giving humanity, maybe, one last chance against the encroaching doom. When his family is evacuated, our protagonist attempts to join them, but the borders close before he can leave. As society collapses around him, he barricades himself in his home. Running low on supplies, he meets a neighbor who tells him about a radio message calling survivors to an evacuation point. After a tense encounter, he realizes his neighbor has turned. The lawyer kills the neighbor and then leaves to escape alone, except for his cat, Luculo. I think I'm pronouncing that name right, but I forget. But him and his cat and a rucksack, a makeshift weapon, a spear gun, and a 9mm he takes off a soldier, he makes his way to another safe haven.
Yeah. Yep, he does.
So if we were to write a hook for this book, I think this is one way we could do it. Imagine waking up in a world that's collapsing, society is crumbling, power grids are failing, and the dead returning to life. Our book follows a Spanish lawyer who documents his struggle for survival in an abandoned world where the greatest danger may not be the undead, but the living. And I think that's just a given. Because you look at any zombie book, the greatest threats to people are the people themselves. So the question for us readers is, will he adapt to this terrifying new reality? Because he sure has trouble adapting the first chapters. Or will the apocalypse claim him like so many others? Obviously, at least we have 70 journal articles or blog entries. But the 5 key points for us is this mysterious virus that it spreads uncontrollably across the globe. Will we find out what actually happened? We have this protagonist documenting the downfall. Will we know more than what he knows? Will we get a glimpse into the breadth of this event, if you will?
I don't
Maybe.
think we will.
I don't think we will either. As
Was I
infrastructure,
supposed to wait? Was I
no,
supposed to wait to say that?
nope. This is part of one of my complaints. As infrastructure crumbles, he fortifies his home, but soon realizes he must leave, and that's the second inciting incident where we have the world falling apart, him having to kill his neighbor, having to leave, him encountering survivors, navigating both zombies and the dangers of human desperation, a trope in zombie stories, and we will see. So we have character goals in this book. The external goal here is to find safety and to survive a world overrun by the undead. The internal goal is to overcome his fear and isolation, deal with his wife's death, forge a new life in this new apocalypse world. And the antagonists are people around him, the other survivors. What are their goals? Probably control limited resources, maintain power over the weak survivors, over the zombies. Will they justify their extreme measures for survival at any cost?
Yeah. So the protagonist, this lawyer, which seems like I mean, you write what you know. The author's a lawyer as well, or was. But his external goals, his external goal is to find safety and survive. Throwback to Slava when we read Girl with All the Gifts, and he's like, they're trying to survive, you dummy. It's like, yes, I've got that in a world overrun by the undead. Cool. His internal goal, supposedly, is to overcome his fear and isolation to forge a new life in the apocalypse. His antagonist is this new world order and other survivors. Their external goal is the antagonist is to control the limited resources, maintain power over weaker survivors like himself. Sorry, not sorry. Their internal goal as the antagonist is to justify their extreme measures for survival at all costs. Now, in terms of a survival book, this one is not doing it for me. Before we dive into the ranting and the raving, didn't you have a side quest you wanted to run by me?
Do I ever? And I think I already have the question answered for me just by a brief comment you made. But if you had to choose between staying barricaded in your home or setting out for a so-called safe space, which would you do and why?
Okay, so this is kind of building on what I was starting to talk about just a little bit ago. That's tough for me because, like I said, I don't really own a lot of guns. I'd probably leave. The question is like, whose place would I go to that I believe would survive well? I probably have to just go to a friend's house that has a lot of guns, and I have a couple of those, but they also have to be close enough that it makes sense. Thankfully, I live in a place that has kind of a bit of country pretty nearby, which is kind of where they live. So I would leave. I would not barricade because I just don't know, to my own demise, how I would have food, honestly. At least if we have guns and someone who knows how to dress a deer, like we could survive at least a bit longer, but who's to say?
Pretty similar to me. And if we're going to set up hypotheticals, I'll assume for this hypothetical that my wife and I have purchased a country home because that's one of our plans.
That's quite a hypothetical. So you don't think it's going to happen tomorrow? You know 3 to 5 years maybe.
Something like that. Yeah. So our ultimate plan is to buy a second home somewhere in the mountains just to have a getaway. It's a very European, Russian, Ukrainian kind of thing to have what's called a dacha, which is pretty much a country home. My wife knows how to garden, and I'm thinking right now of 28 days later in the end where the two main characters are in some English countryside in a home, and they are, I forget exactly what happens and how the movie ends, but they're in a home in the country surviving off the land. I have my hunting rifle. I know how to hunt. I've never dressed a deer, but I know the steps to do it. I'm sure forced to survive, I would be just fine figuring that out. And then I know how to cook. So
the cooking you're going to be fine with. It's the like, and I know you hunt, so I guess my question is, how familiar are you with foraging or knowing what parts of an animal you can eat? So like, if you had to start eating squirrel, well, your cooking probably is going to help out with that. But
I know which parts of the animal to eat. You have to gut the animal, clean the animal. This is what's called dressing. Clean the animal, gut the animal, skin it, trim the fat, and then cook the meat. And for a squirrel, I guess I can figure it out. But for a deer, that's easy. You know, which parts of it you eat. You eat the meaty parts that are on the body and not, like the hoofs or the
meaty
brains.
parts. Good. Yes. That's very educational.
That's somewhat reductionistic, but if I was trying to explain it to a 10-year-old, like, which parts of the deer do you eat? Well, don't eat the hoofs, don't eat the eyes, eat the meat of the deer. That'll be my advice to a 10-year-old trying to survive a zombie apocalypse.
You know a lot of 10-year-olds who are trying to survive zombie apocalypses, or just Melanie?
Just Melanie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. If you know, you know.
Well, if you guys are enjoying today's side quest, be sure to drop us a rating and help spread the word about our little podcast here.
Yes, please. Now we get to go on our little rant. All right. So before we get to the themes, let's talk through like how much you quote love end quote this book, Slava. Lay it to us straight.
I don't love this book.
Wow, we're all very shocked. Why?
Well, I'm not intrigued by the story. I don't like the journal format in a book. If this was an online thing, like it started out, and then I would just go back and read journal entries or blog entries, like creepypasta stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I think that'd be cool. Because then I could let my imagination run with it. That was my response to you in the previous book, The Girl with All the Gifts. Well, just turn on your imagination, and that will get you through the slump that you were feeling the first 37 chapters of The Girl with All the Gifts. Here, there is so little information that, yeah, sure, I can turn on my imagination, and knowing enough about zombie genre and zombie stories, I can obviously fill in the gaps. But putting only goodness, putting only blog entries or journal entries into a book format just doesn't do it. It doesn't build the world. The guy through whose eyes we're viewing this world in a limited way, which is, I said already, a problem for me because it's too limited. I also don't like the character. I find him too soft and weak. And sure, you could say, well, he's just a lawyer. He's going through a lot of stuff and he's thrown into this chaotic, topsy-turvy, world where everything's falling apart. There's people getting up from being dead and eating each other. Sure, not everybody's Sergeant Parks that can adapt well. He's not hardened by this world. He's just being thrown into it. I'm with you. I'm okay with taking a weak character and watching him grow into somebody who is a adept survivalist in a zombie apocalypse. We can show me that, and maybe by book 2 or 3, we see that. But even the way he responds to the immediate threats as he's thrust into them, I just don't like him. And it's not that, oh, I'm so strong and I'm so good and I've had a harder life, so I'm better adapt. I'm not saying that because I'm sure at least one listener would be like, well, great,
I could beat
Slava.
you up. Yeah.
I can beat you up. Yeah, I'm not trying to be a fake tough guy here. I'm just saying his responses are weak, and that's not the problem because, again, I can see a character growing, and that would be a cool story to see somebody who's an absolute weakling turn into a hardened fighter in this world or a hardened survivalist. I just don't like him. He just seems too soft, and like the stuff that he complains about and the stuff that he thinks is, let me put it this way. The stuff that he reacts to, whether he's complaining or he's expressing shock, I'm like, I don't understand. I can't empathize or connect with him because I'm like, you do realize that whatever this is, zombies or Ebola, or it's a new version of the Death Plague. So whatever this is, I just find his reactions to his surroundings kind of meh. Maybe it's the way it's written. Maybe it's not even the content of what he says. It's just how it's presented. I don't know. I don't like his character, both as the character and his character makeup. I would hate to be with him on this trip, wherever he's going in the boat or when he gets to the dock, or just being his neighbor would be annoying, constant complaining and whining about, oh, look at the poor zombies. I'm barfing because I have to kill an undead. I don't see him surviving. That's the kind of guy that dies in the first 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't disagree with you. I think part of the problem is that he has never had to survive. Like, when you're a cushy lawyer, you've never had to dress an animal. You've never had to figure out how to survive by not going to the store. So his responses make sense to me, but I still don't like him as a character because of like his background. Also, can we just talk about the fact that he never once addresses that he has friends? I haven't seen him talk about friends at all. He talks about the neighbor that he like kind of talked to. He has a sister, and like, not that there aren't people like this in the world, but you would think that he'd have at least one friend that he's like, "Oh my god, are you okay? Let's connect." Or, "Hey, can I join you?"
I didn't think about that, but that's absolutely right.
Now, granted, one of the themes here is isolation, which we'll get into later, but I don't think that this did well as a book. Now, that said, he's successful. So who are we to talk? Right? Like, and it started out as a blog. I honestly think that the reason that it did well is because it started out as a blog, because these entries don't do it for me. Before we hit record, I was telling you about how I previously had written a story that was like journal entry esque about a gal who lives in New York and is kind of like experiencing it for the first time. She's trying to be an actor, whatever. I lived in New York and I tried to experience it, and I was in the film community. So I am familiar with that story, and I met a bunch of these people. And so I was like, how would this look through the eyes of a person who came from a small town, blah, blah, blah. Like, I wrote something that I understood and had a perspective on. The feedback I got when I wrote this, and this is in college, this is like a decade, more than a decade ago at this, probably 15 years. The feedback I got from the writing class was like, hey, this story's like not engaging enough, but I was like hyped on it. I was like, oh no, I think this is like got something to it, whatever. But now, as someone thinking back to reading it, journal entry storytelling, if it's just journal entries, that's rough, man. You don't get enough information. You're not like in the head of the person. And some people might kick back and go, well, you are, because they're writing down their thoughts. It's like, nah, this guy's just doing news updates. Not specifically, but that's how it feels, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's what the king did. Here's the with armies doing this, blah blah blah. And so I'm gonna say it. I just don't like this book. Like, we'll finish it. We'll talk about it. I don't enjoy this book though. You know me. I like to push us both to have hard stances on these things. Hashtag city in the city. So thanks for the recommendation, Insta user. I would I would bet that you probably found this when it was a serial release and it was being pushed out to the blog regularly. That's my guess. And you got in on the hype. But I think the medium that it is, where we're both kind of coming in blind, it's just not the right medium for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I know I've said this already, and I said this to you before we hit recording. If these journal articles were just journal articles, I keep saying journal articles, journal entries on a blog, creepypasta style, beautiful piece of art, I would say. I like that kind of stuff. I like creepypasta. I like internet writing. I like stories that are off the beaten path. I've said that numerous times. And this would fit in, albeit not all the way, but it would fit in, enough for me to be interested in reading these blog articles, because there'll be a setup. All right, I'm going into this. These are blog articles from the past, the future, a different world, where the world has fallen apart, and I'm reading a guy's diary. Cool. I'll read it, consume it, enjoy it, move on. But this is a book, so it's completely different, and a different approach is needed. If these journal articles were dispersed through the book, where we have the overarching story, what's going on in this world, it's happening in Spain, and then the book either quotes or gives us epigraphs, like Sanderson does, or like Stephen King did in It with Mike's entries, beautiful. I love it. Because then we have the world, we're thrown into it, we have these characters, and then this random lawyer's blog posts give us an insight into what else is going on. It gives us more meat on the bone. It gives us a different perspective. Maybe this guy's journal entries reveal something that the story is not telling us, or is obfuscating on purpose to create tension, and we are going one way, and then we read lawyer journal entry number 34, and we're like, holy crap, the last two chapters, the guy that we thought was the good guy might be a bad guy. Then journal entries are great, but just a collection of journal entries in book form doesn't do it for me at all.
Yeah, it's not for me. And here's the thing. Let me just say this. Just because we rag on your favorite book is not a commentary on your taste in books. It's just like, this one doesn't do it for us, and here's why.
Yeah.
Just as a caveat.
Absolutely.
I think that this literally would be better as a blog released serially. Okay, and it makes sense to me that this guy got big. That all makes sense to me. But in its format, again, as two people coming in blind, it's tough. Oh, and then another commentary, because we're doing audiobook. Slava earlier this week, she's like, do you want to hear Quoth fight against the zombie apocalypse? Because Nick Podell is the reader. That to me is funny.
Well, what did I say? The name of the virus, Quoth fights the undead, or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And honestly, Spencer, you're winning me over to your side about not liking Nick Podell. listening to him read this, all I could hear is Quoth. I'm like, I'm not mesmerized by this book. I'm not hooked. And now I have Quoth. And so I'm imagining Quoth complaining, as he was wont to do in some of his stuff. And so I'm like, this is Quoth, who happens to be a lawyer, who happens to have more self-identity issues. And now he's also the soft guy, kind of there, mourning his wife, complaining about the neighbor, making social commentary about the humanity and worth of zombies. And granted, he doesn't know there's zombies per
Yeah, he
se.
hasn't,
So
like, admitted that to himself, I feel like. It almost feels like the assumption of the character is that he doesn't know what a zombie is. That's
right,
almost kinda what it feels like.
if we're being generous and careful in how we approach the critique, let's just say this happens because every zombie story assumes that there's no such thing as zombies until they arrive in the story, right? It's not like Resident Evil or pick a video game or another zombie piece of media. Obviously, these are zombies. We have books on this and scientific knowledge. These are zombies. This is how we fight them. Each zombie story starts out with it's a regular world. There's no such thing as zombies. All of a sudden, something happens that turns people into zombies. And then they had to figure out what the hell this is. So I get that part of the story. But again, gets back to how he processed this stuff. It's not captivating for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, stop. What are you doing, buddy?
I think maybe the disconnect for me here is that being someone who's intelligent enough to become a lawyer, you have to start making connections. Like,
Yeah.
specifically in law, what were you doing on the 21st of December? Oh, that also lines up with the fact that you weren't at this place. It's that you were cheating on your wife, blah, 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 whatever it is, right? Like, you have to make connections. Okay, it's a zombie book, and yes, you don't want to admit it, but like, make that part of the internal struggle. Like, I don't want to admit that these are not people anymore. But I think even people who don't watch or read zombie movies know, like, oh, I know what a zombie is,
Yeah.
right? Like, unless he was coming from a third world country, which he's not. The ability to suspend disbelief to dive into the story here doesn't. It's just not. It's not there for me.
You know what would be
So
really cool? Let's go with that. Third world country, a very poor farmer. And here's the funny part about third world countries they're
the
connected to the
funny
internet.
part. Just pause for a second. I don't think I've ever heard a sillier statement. It's not untrue. The funny part about third world countries. Cool. Cool.
They are connected to the internet. We think of them as completely disconnected from the world. Now,
Right.
they might not have the infrastructure that we have, they might not have the economy that we have, but your average poor farmer, let's go with that, in a third world country, at least in Africa, this is something that I watched a documentary on about 10 years ago, where how in Africa you will have these metropolises and they're a little bit more built up. They're like second world countries, actually. But if you go outside of those metropolises, it really gets third world. But you'll have these folks in these parts of Africa that have cell phones that are connected, that they might not have the best Wi Fi, but they're connected to the internet somehow.
Right.
So I'm imagining, let's say a guy from Africa who has limited knowledge or no knowledge at all of a thing that is a zombie or the genre that is the zombie genre. And his world starts falling apart. And he starts writing emails to his family, or he starts texting, or he starts journaling what he sees. What would somebody in that context think of zombies? That would be interesting because
That's a different story. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But to your point, a guy who lives in the modern world, who lives in a well-developed metropolis in a well-developed European country, who is a lawyer, who is supposedly educated in rhetoric and logic, he can't put two and two together and say, "Oh, there's something happening here that's more than just COVID light or a big old virus." I forget what he said. Journal entry 20. He's talking about how we should take care of these people and, try to figure out what's going on. Well, yes, on the surface, that sounds great.
I'll push back a little bit about that though. Like at journal entry 20, he's still in his house. He can still go to the store. Society still functions a little bit. It's like not close enough to him. So like there's still a
Sure.
belief like, oh, it's a general sickness. You brought up COVID, and I will say it did have me the first I don't know, we'll just call it 20. First 20 chapters, first 20 entries, where I'm like, oh yeah, this kind of seems familiar because we all lived through something similar in 2020 to like 2022 ish, right? I was like, oh yeah, I remember something similar. He was just kind of like middle of the road, kind of gray water, muddy water, because he wasn't like taking a side of like, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be shutting the world down. And he didn't take like, oh man, we really got to help these people. He was just like,
Hmm.
I wonder what's going on. He was confused. Not even like true confusion though. He was just like, he didn't take a stance on what was going on in the world, but he'd watch it every day. He bought the radio to listen in eventually in like 25 or 30. And he was just kind of like pseudo in denial. And I say pseudo in denial because he wasn't really in denial. I don't feel like we had enough evidence that he was like, no, buddy, you're in denial. Like something's happening. And you're just like, no, I'm just going to go to work to get it. They're like, it's fine. It's, something like that, right? Like,
I think you just hit the nail on the head. You've uncovered why I don't like him and why I called him soft. It's because the gray, mushy middle.
it's not interesting
No.
in any story, this or other. Like the gray, mushy middle. It's why it's not even interesting for this show, right? Like, which is why, and it's the only episode, and I thank you, but like it's the only episode I can point to is the City and the City, where you were like, I kind of like it, but it's like, and I'm not, not ragging on you as you, but like that was the gray mushy middle. It's like you don't like it. Just say that you don't like it.
That's exactly it. Now we have uncovered why, for me, I find the character soft. And it's not because I'm trying to play a fake tough guy and I would have done it this way. And I'd have totally figured it out. And this is what I would have done. It's not that. It's
Slava invented the cure.
right. He can't take a stance, or he can't be vulnerable. We can't see exactly why he's weak and soft and doesn't have an ability to your point, make a decision or to take a stance or whatever, or to respond forcefully, whether in a negative or positive. If he was a complete blubbering weakling, I'd have
That's
been
one
okay
thing.
with that.
That's
I
one
would have been
thing.
okay with that. I wouldn't judge, because
Like,
obviously
who's the kid in It whose mom, Phil?
Eddie.
Eddie. Like, we get it. We get it. We've had friends whose moms have been overbearing and they won't let him, look at an ant because it might bite him. Right? Like, we know those people.
Yeah.
We get it.
Well, problem solved. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Side Quest.
No. We have to talk about
wait.
themes. We have to talk about themes.
Themes. Sorry. Yeah, well, that's perfect time to move on themes. I think we've covered that well. So we have 5 themes that you put together for us. It's survival against all odds.
Which he's doing poorly. I'm going to make commentary on each of these. Please keep going.
Please do.
Just
Please
pause
do.
afterward.
The horror of isolation.
Well, maybe you should make some friends.
The fragility of society.
That's not a surprise to anybody.
Morality in the apocalypse. And the fear of the unknown.
In terms of morality in the apocalypse, how about morality in general? We won't. We won't do that. But people's thoughts on morality are clearly misaligned. I was having a conversation. I guess I'm doing this. I was having a conversation with a buddy at work yesterday, and he was talking about people desire to say that if you have moral and ethics, people who have moral and ethics and are poor can become better off in society than people who have moral and ethics and they're like from better society, something like that. And the gist of what we were talking about though is that we didn't really get to dive into it because it was like over lunch, which 30 minutes, whatever. The gist of it is that it didn't matter from these studies he was reading and experiments that people were doing, social experiments, but like scientific, scholarly, not like your viral YouTube videos. It had nothing to do. There was no correlation between morality for these people. It was just like the culture itself. And so like when people talk about morality, you can't strictly say morality. You have to talk about like, well, what culture are they coming from? What has the culture been like for the last 25 years? Then we'd get into morality, and we have to factor into your point, which you say in other episodes, like belief system,
Worldview.
Thank you, worldview. And like worldview is shaped by the culture you grew up in and your life experience. Like you can't just be like, well, everyone should be moral. It's like, okay, Well, some countries believe that killing little girls is moral. Some countries think that chopping off parts of human bodies is moral. Just stop with like, well, people should be moral because you're making so many assumptions that you can't even have a conversation about this.
There's 2 points that can be extrapolated from that. One is the different types of moralities. There is situational ethics, there's morality that is very pragmatic and utilitarian. There is morality that is passive or pacifistic. What is the greater good for each system of morality? That's one thing as the end cap to what you're saying, if you will. And I think another thing that is overarching, as opposed to being an end cap, is the worldview of any person is, yes, shaped by your culture, your society, your religion, or lack thereof. Because of that and other external and internal forces, if you will, provide you with certain presuppositions that you come to anything with, either a situation or a piece of knowledge or information, a piece of information. You come to it with certain presuppositions because of your worldview. And the example I always use is a materialist and somebody who is not a materialist. Not even going to put any religious context
Yep.
on it. Just somebody who's
Yep.
not a materialist who believes there's something out there other than just straight matter. Both of those people come to the understanding of gravity, physics, mathematics with certain preconceived notions, certain presuppositions. And a worldview is comprised of 3 things. Metaphysics. What is reality? Is matter all we know or can know, or are there immaterial things, things outside of our immediate experience? Epistemology, the study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? And then drives to ethics, how we act, the morality part of it. Everybody and their mother has a worldview. We'll interpret what we see based through it. And sometimes those change, and that's why dialogue is great and debate is great and diverse worldviews are great in the marketplace when they're being discussed. Not the way we discuss them in 2025, but when they're being discussed, and a hard pushback is welcomed because that kind of strengthens our worldviews.
Just one comment to sharpen epistemology. Epistemology goes a little deeper. It's actually the beginning of knowledge. Oddly enough, I did terrible in statistics in college, but I did great in epistemology. I can philosophically talk about when knowledge starts. I got an A in that and a D in statistics. So do with that whatever you will. This is not financial advice.
So your knowledge of statistics is wanting.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
then. Specifically because the teacher only taught math people, and I asked her questions. Anyway, I'll stop on that. Frustrations with that teacher specifically. But to bring us back, morality is not a quaint topic that you can have at any time about anything unless you're going to stop and have a conversation about the things you're talking about, stuff that you mentioned, and like get a at least some baseline agreement on like some key elements before you even have the conversation that you want to have. Ironically enough, all that to say, we won't use that as a theme that we'll talk about.
We don't have enough information to discuss it.
Right. And we'll leave that.
Your point stands?
Yeah.
There's just not enough explored here about morality, except this guy's journal entries. And I don't think there's enough foundation for us to pick it apart and say, oh, when he has to kill the neighbor because the neighbor has turned,
Mm-hmm.
well, what else is he going to do? The neighbor has turned. And maybe we can squeeze some amount of interesting bits of that, but there's just not enough, in my opinion, to talk about here.
So, I think fear of the unknown's a fine theme.
Yeah.
Let's look at that because, we all lived through 2020, and depending on where you were at, the fear of the unknown did become pervasive in society to the point where families and friends started drawing hard lines against each other. Ironically enough, we don't have to get into this part of it, but like on pseudo moral grounds because of the fear of the unknown. Honestly, I think that with what we lived through, the fear of the unknown was perpetuated by the news, lack of scientific method. Our imaginations are really powerful tools that, when left unharnessed, will create the worst scenarios possible. But in reality, a lot of times that's not even the case. 9.9 times out of 10. Because we're building up the unknown part of it, which then fuels the fear, which then builds up more unknown, which fuels the fear. And people do irrational things like The Mist, Stephen King's The Mist, right? Like you've got the religious zealot, you've got the general townspeople. Some of them have different thresholds for the fear of the unknown, and then you have these alien bug things starting to come at the grocery store. And like, okay, at that point, the unknown is like, I don't know where these came from, but I know they want to kill us. So at that much, you can understand that it's a survival thing because there's a direct threat and there's some tangibility to the unknown. What about you? Do you think that the fear of the unknown is well covered in this book so far? Or is it another muddy water gray area?
I think it's covered well enough, meaning that we have this guy in a world that's fallen apart. He doesn't know what's going on until journal entries, late 30s, early 40s. So I think it's covered well enough in the sense that it's presented, and here's we have a protagonist in a world that's fallen apart, and there is an element of uncertainty for him, right? He doesn't know what's going on, even though, oh, okay, so they're zombies. Oh, okay, so they are actually the undead walking among us. Oh, they are really dangerous. No, we shouldn't coddle them and, give them hugs. Maybe that'll stop them from eating us. He's finally is pulled out of his naivete. So I think that's covered well. Can't be covered to the extent that either of us could find compelling because of the setup, which is journal entries. He doesn't provide enough information for us to point to and say, oh, here's a great example of how he is fearing the unknown, and here's how he's processing event X or event Z. So it's set up in the story, it's touched upon, but given the way the story is written, I don't think it's explored as deeply as it could be.
Totally agree. What do you guys think in the comments? Do you think that the fear of the unknown is covered quite well? Or do you think that it's kind of a muddy middle? And it's just kind of like, it's kind of run of the mill, et cetera, et cetera. Leave us some comments and let us know. Let's leave some of these themes because we kind of went off for a while on why we weren't going to pick one of them, and wrap up the show, Slava, with a little bit of talk of the genre. You're more of an expert in horror and zombie books than I am. I'd like to know, in your mind, some of the other ones you've read. I've kind of watched more things than I've read for the zombie specific items, but how is this comparing so far with, I guess I'll say, likes and dislikes? Like, is there anything that you like about this so far? Is it the cat? Does the cat feel like a strong character to you?
I think the cat is a strong character. I like Ken the cat.
Okay.
I've also watched more than I read. I think this is the second zombie book that I've read. I've watched a lot of shorts, meaning like, short films or the classics, Night of the Living Dead. I watched the recent classics, 28 Days Later, which are, I think, like 20 years old, if not 30 years old.
Yeah, they're old.
They're more modern classics than the ones from the 70s, right?
Fair, yeah.
Comparing movies and books is a little bit different.
Well, it's not just like, so zombie, yes, but also horror. You've read a ton of Stephen King. You've read of other horror books.
Yep.
You've read survival books. It doesn't have to be limited to zombie, but like, share with us, okay, in terms of a horror book, this is or isn't cutting it. In terms of a survival book, it is or isn't cutting it.
It's not cutting it for me on either genre. As far as horror goes, this is definitely not scary or eerie. I'm not at all pulled into it on the horror aspect of it at all.
So would you say that horror books need to pull you in? Not just you, not like Slava, but like,
there has
it should do a job.
You should be pulled into the world in a way where the creep factor is amped up to 11. That's a good horror book.
Mm-hmm.
There's some more tame horror books that discuss maybe psychological things like Signs of the Lambs, right? So it's more psychological horror. There's the creepiness is there, and the scare factor is the murderer and this monster who's actually just human. Then you have The Exorcist, where the monster is a literal demon possessing a 12-year-old. Two different type of horrors, two different type of scary. But for both books, you are pulled into the world.
Right.
Harris with Silence of the Lambs, Blatty with Exorcist, Stephen King, the different books he has, some of them are a little bit supernatural, some of them are more straightforward. People are monsters, like Misery. The monster's the crazy fan. It, Pennywise the Clown. So it has to be written in a way where you can be pulled into the story. And a journal entry, I suppose, could pull you in if it's set up right, where you're reading this guy's recap of what happened to him that day, but what he writes is more captivating than what this guy does. I don't know.
You just reminded me, and this isn't an exact one-to-one, but the only story that's very, very close to a journal entry that I've really, really liked is a short story. It's H.P. Lovecraft. When these guys go insane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, some of his stories are journal entries.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's Dagon. That's the only time, but it's because, and here's the difference, right? It's because he's describing how he's been going mad, but the thing is, he doesn't say, I'm going mad. We see that he's going mad. He talks about, like, I was lured in, and then the other captain, like, killed himself, and then there's all this screaming, and, like, he describes it in a way that's not specifically a journal entry, but it is an entry from the entity of the character. I'm just realizing, like, nobody else has done it that well, but it's not entry 15, like, there was a little bit of that, but it wasn't strictly that.
And here, I'll throw a bone to the book. It's translation.
You think so?
Maybe. In Spanish or in Spain, the way this stuff is written and what he says is more captivating to the culture.
Yeah.
Because what he says in Spanish, maybe there's context behind the words that reveals something to the Spanish readers. Now, like, oh, I know what he's talking about. Yeah, that's messed up.
We'll 100% concede that as a possibility, as someone who doesn't speak Spanish. Yeah.
As somebody who only swears in Spanish and can order food at a Mexican restaurant.
Caliente. Well, that's all I got for the day.
Well, that's all I got, too. Thanks for joining us on this side quest. Be sure to share this episode with your fellow book lovers and join the conversation on Instagram and YouTube. And we'll see you next time.